The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and welcome to another episode of The Package Tourist, hosted by the Package Tourist in the magical mystery tour called Life, Matthew DiBiase, who tonight will be interviewing two-time sports author and hockey writer Matthew Blittner about his second book, The Unforgettable New Jersey Devils, Games and Moments from the Press Box, Ice, and Front Office.
Thank you, Ralph. Tonight, I have the great honor of interviewing a bright newcomer in the realm of hockey literature, Matthew Blittner, who will share with us his experiences and insights in writing his second book, Unforgettable New Jersey Devils, Games and Moments from the Press Box, Ice, and Front Office. Matt, when I read your book, I was struck by its unique perspective. This isn't a conventional sports oral history. Would you please tell the audience the innovative way you explore New Jersey Devils history?
Sure thing. So what happens was with my first book, which was about the New York Rangers, I decided that I wanted to bring to life the stories that fans didn't necessarily know, but from the perspective of the people who are tasked with bringing the stories to life, the writers and the broadcasters, and a couple of former players for commentary purposes. So for the Devils book, I wanted to expand on that and, include a few more former players and also include some front office people, because the fans don't really hear from them too much. And so in order to bring stories to life, it gives a different perspective, as you mentioned, about how people view these games. Fans are always saying, I wonder what's going on here, or I wonder what's going on with that. And it's the jobs of the writers and broadcasters to answer those questions, whether it's in their columns, in the newspaper, or on their talk shows, radio, TV, whatever. And so I figured it would be a good idea to bring that perspective to life in this book.
Now, in the book, you interviewed some notable hockey media figures, like, for instance, Hall of Fame broadcaster Doc Emmerich. What was it like interviewing him? What were your thoughts and impressions when you talked to him?
Well, Doc has always been a very nice, very genuine individual. He's always been and very much willing to answer any questions that I've had. The number of times that I've ran into him either at Madison Square Garden, at Barclays Center, or at Prudential Center. And when we did the interview, it was during the playoffs. I believe it was during the Eastern Conference Final during off day, if I'm not mistaken. And he was very much willing. I had asked him if he had maybe 20 to 25 minutes to do an interview. Hour and a half later, he was still going. And that's a testament to just, how willing Doc is to share his stories and everything. He really makes it really easy to be for the interviewer to interview him. And he loves to share his stories. I believe there was a time last year when he was honored. I forget where. I'm sure it's possible to be checked. But he was honored somewhere, and he actually got up in front of a crowd of people and willingly gave out his personal email address for any young broadcasters to contact him, or any young journalists to contact him if they need advice for anything. And I don't really know too many other writers or broadcasters who are willingly giving out their personal contact information to a crowded audience and to anyone at large just for, advice and stuff. So that really shows the depth of Doc's character and just how excellent he is and just what a wonderful storyteller he can be.
When you talk to Doc, if you could put your finger on it, what is it that makes him the Hall of Fame broadcaster that he is? If there's one quality you could isolate, what is it that he brings to his audience that really makes him a Hall of Fame broadcaster?
Well, it's a couple things. So in the book, even Doc extensively goes into his background growing up wanting to be a baseball broadcaster and going from job to job and place to place until he would finally get involved, and then, crossing over into hockey and everything, starting out with the Devils. And for him, he wasn't a former player. He wasn't, the son of someone famous who grew up around the sport or anything. He's really self-made, and he brings the enthusiasm of that, not to call him a fan because he's obviously doing this professionally, but he brings the enthusiasm of his upbringing into his calls. And from my experience anyway, not to speak for fans at large, but fans connect more with writers and broadcasters who remember where they came from and they tell their stories and use that same enthusiasm because it helps connect on a human level in that regard, and not just spewing facts that maybe fans don't care about or explaining things in a way that fans maybe don't understand. When former players go into the X's and O's of certain things, it might lose the casual fan because they didn't play hockey or whatever sport you might be talking about. But for guys like Doc, they talk to it the same way they would as if they were still a fan, and that's what brings such the Hall of Fame character that he is.
Now, you also in the book interviewed legendary hockey writer Stan Fischler. What was it like interviewing him?
So I have a very extensive background with the Hockey Maven. He was a mentor of mine for, I think my fourth season now. I started learning under him in July 2016. So, it's been a while. So to get a chance to sit down with him and maybe, I guess, turn the tables instead of having him ask me questions about, where am I going with certain things and trying to get me to become a better writer even. I got to turn the tables and, turn it around and ask him all of these questions. And again, he did it for my Ranger book and he did it for my Devils book, where, he goes back, I think he's probably entering his 70th year of covering the National Hockey League. I know he's not on TV anymore, but he does still write columns every week for the Islanders and the Devils and the NHL.com. So I believe he's covered the league now for 70 years, give or take a few years. And, there's no one that can match his experience and his storytelling and his overall memory on things, because when he was growing up, he didn't just focus on the NHL. He also focused on, at the time, the Eastern League, the Eastern Amateur Hockey League, and he would go to those type of games, and he really was a student of not just the NHL, but of hockey, and he brings that knowledge and wisdom to everything. So hearing him tell his stories is really something that is a very wonderful experience, and something that any hockey fan or young writer or even old writers should really get a chance to do at some point.
I think one of the great mysteries is why isn't Stan Fischler been inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame, as part of the Elmer Ferguson Award? I mean, what is your take on that? Do you have a theory, or did he discuss that with you? I mean, to me, it's a great mystery, because one of my own discussions with hockey players, they always spoke with great admiration for Fischler's knowledge of the game. Why isn't he in the Hall of Fame? What is your view on that?
Well, first and foremost, that's above my pay grade on anything. I don't have a vote on the Elmer Ferguson committee. I do know that there is a select committee of writers and former executives and stuff and former winners who get to vote. It is not the entire Professional Hockey Writers Association that votes on it. It is a much more secluded voting process. I can't answer as to why he's not. He certainly deserves to be in. I know that maybe his TV work with the Islanders and the Devils and slightly with the Rangers might have something to do, if I could guess, just because a lot of people grew up watching him as an analyst and maybe forgot that he was a writer. So maybe that might have something to do with it, where they might be thinking, well, shouldn't he be up for or the Foster Hewitt, but which is actually primarily for play-by-play, not even for analysts. But I really can't answer as to why he hasn't gotten in on the Elmer Ferguson and ballot. I know that there's a concerted effort by a number of writers each year to make sure he's on the ballot and have a groundswell support. But, hopefully sooner rather than later he'll get in.
Now, when in your book, and this is the amazing aspect, I mean, you covered the waterfront. It's not just print journalism. You talk to TV men, radio men, the men who write on the who do internet and all that. Of all the journalists you interviewed, of them all, which of them surprised you the most when it came to when they were sharing their memories of their career paths? Did anyone really surprise you when they were discussing their careers with you, that what you found like educational or inspirational when you were talking to them?
Well, maybe a surprise might be a wrong word, since I've gotten to work alongside these guys now for a few seasons. But definitely inspirational, educational would be a good way to describe it. And if anyone's interested, they should definitely check out the Steve Cangelosi chapter first and foremost. Cangelosi went from job to job, place to place, chasing his dream. He expresses it explicitly in the book that, he wanted to work for MSG Network. He wanted to be there. He wanted to be a part of their sports broadcast team. And he worked and worked and worked until he got to where he is. It was by certainly no means an easy journey or short journey. It was years, literally years in the making, not 2 or 3, but over a decade in the making. And just to hear him talk about, each stop and how each stop led into the next stop. It's not that he had one stop and then, something came out of the blue and there's no correlation, but he literally, if you want to almost picture like a ladder or something, and he went from run to run to run until he finally reached where he is. And as you mentioned, a lot of Devils fans didn't necessarily take to him at first because he was replacing the legendary Doc Emmerich, who decided to go national with NBC. But after a while, Devils fans did start to warm up to Cangelosi, and now you'd be hard-pressed to find a Devils fan who doesn't love listening to him call a game. Might occasionally sound like he's having a heart attack in the booth, but that is his enthusiasm for the game and for the Devils, and he really makes fans captivated. He keeps them captivated on every bit of action that's going on in the game.
Matt, would you please share with the audience your background and how you came to be a hockey journalist?
Okay. Well, I promise you it's not nearly as long a story as most of the people who are in the book. So I started out as a master's student for sports management at Brooklyn College in the late summer, early fall of 2015. And as part of my sports management master's program, I had to, do something in the sports world, be it an internship, a job, something. I had to find something. So as most any person, who is applying for jobs and internships in any field, I was applying, and eventually I applied for an editorial internship with Dan Fischler. And after a while, I actually heard back, and he picked me out of a pool of unknown applicants at this particular point. He has never once actually bothered to tell me how many people he picked me out of. I like to think it's a lot. Maybe it isn't. And so from there, I would edit his newsletter, the Fischler Report, which is a once a week, 52-week a year hockey newsletter for insiders. And then that led to me writing and covering. I was covering the Islanders. I was covering the Rangers, occasionally covering the Devils. And then my role got flipped a little bit, where I was covering the Rangers and then a little Islanders and a little Devils. And then MSG Networks, when The Athletic came to New York City, they took Rick Carpinello and Arthur Staple, the two big hockey writers, Rick from the Rangers and Arthur from the Islanders. Rick had been at MSG Networks for a little while, and Arthur had been at Newsday. And so MSG Networks needed somebody for their Ranger beat. And at the recommendation of the Maven, as well as some of the connections I had made, they brought me on in February of the 2017-18 season. And I ran with it from there. And then eventually I added New York Sports Day and to cover the Islanders during last season. and I've written for the Hockey News magazine, and it's just been a continuing progressive approach to writing for newsletters, magazines, and websites, and then deciding to write a book, and then a second book, and now a third book. And that's pretty much where I am at my career right now.
So are you solely a hockey journalist, or do you happen to cover any other sports, or is it just strictly hockey?
So I currently cover only hockey, but I do have experience from non-journalism experience in other sports. I did grow up playing baseball. I have worked in college football, All-Star Bowl game, the Dream Bowl. I helped run a men's basketball league. And as a master's in sports management, I do have a lot of working knowledge for a lot of different sports and have done projects for various different things. I considered myself a student of baseball ever since I was little. I've probably read more baseball books than most normal people at this particular point in my life. And so as much as my journalism experience currently only covers hockey, I would not say that I am strictly a hockey person. I am a well-rounded sports person.
Do you have like future aspirations of like getting into radio or TV work, or do you prefer to remain as a print journalist?
So for right now, I'm loving writing and being a print or digital journalist if that's the way the industry is going. Could I maybe see myself one day? I mean, I've been on radio a few times promoting my books and podcasts like yours. Again, thank you for bringing me on. I've been on TV to promote the books. For right now, I definitely do enjoy the writing aspect of it. I'm not going to rule out any radio or TV down the line, but for right now, I do enjoy being a writer.
Now, you mentioned you're working on your third book. What will that be about, Matt?
So it's a continuation of my series. The first book was Unforgettable Rangers, Games and Moments from the Press Box. This book, the second book was Unforgettable New Jersey Devils, Games and Moments from the Press Box, Ice, and Front Office. And the third book is Unforgettable New York Islanders, Games and Moments from the Press Box and Ice. And I currently already done a couple of interviews for that and hope to have that out at some point towards the end of this hockey season.
Oh, wow. Okay. We'll have to do another podcast about that one, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, this question that I'm going to ask is, now this book was self-published, correct?
Yes. Both of my books were self-published, as will the third one.
Okay. Now, the reason why I asked that is that I too have self-published my second and third book. So, and also I want to add, I'm aiming this. Hopefully, people are listening to this. There are some other authors who want to self-publish themselves. So I think they would appreciate any insights into the industry, because the self-publishing industry seems to be growing, exponentially. There's very many outlets out there for people to put their works out. And of course, I myself availed myself. What company did you use for your self-publishing, Matt?
I used Amazon. It's KDP Select. It's Amazon self-publishing portal. I was turned towards that by fellow hockey author you might know, Mark Rosenman, who had self-published a couple of books himself. And, when it being explained to me by the benefits of self-publishing, really having more creative control over your product and everything, really was the way to go with it. And so I've gone down that path twice. I will be going down it a third time, and who knows how many more times in the future after that.
What struck me about Unforgettable New Jersey Devils is actually it's rather brief. I mean, did you leave a lot of material on the cutting room floor, or was it you just used what you had? I mean, I don't mean it as a criticism. I'm just struck. It's almost it's very a truncated volume. I'm just kind of curious about that.
Well, with any project, obviously some things will be left on the cutting room floor. I assure you nothing of significance was left on the cutting room floor. But also, there were some people who I wanted to talk to who declined to be part of the book. I'm not going to mention their names out of respect for them, but there were definitely a few people who I had my eye on who, for one reason or another, declined to be a part of the project. So that would have added a few more chapters. And then also, you have to find people who are willing to really delve into their stories. And one thing that I've found, and this isn't a knock on anybody, it's that, for writers are more willing to share their in-depth stories more so than, let's say, former players. And then when it comes to maybe broadcasters, at least in my experience from my two books, play-by-play guys are more willing to delve into stuff than color analysts. Now, I don't know the reason for any of those trends, and again, those trends might just be from what I've experienced and could be completely reversed in regular things. Again, it's not a knock on anybody, but it is a challenge finding people to delve into their stories, especially when, people are doing their own books even, and people are, sometimes people just don't want to share everything because maybe there's a story that they're not comfortable having out there. In this day and age with social media, things can be misconstrued a lot. And so a lot of times people would rather not open themselves up to potential conflict in today's society.
When I was reading the book, I think besides discussing the great games in New Jersey Devils history, what I got the feeling was that this was like a nice little inspirational how-to book that you're reaching out to those young people, high school level or early college level who'd like to get into some form of journalism, but they're wondering, how do I go about doing it? Is the door closed to me? Was this also kind of like a little inspirational message where you're beckoning to people like that? In other words, hey, the door's not closed. Is that accurate?
Well, I'm never going to take away and say that something shouldn't be inspirational. People find inspiration from both of my books and want to get into journalism. Congratulations, and I'm glad to been that source of inspiration for them. But my primary focus was to bring these stories to life for the fans who lived through it, or the new generation of fans who are trying to connect with the teams and are trying to figure out how. I mean, it's been, almost 2 decades since the Devils last won the Cup. It's been almost 3 decades since the Rangers last won the Cup. There are fans who are coming of age now who don't remember the glory years for these teams, and they deserve to be able to find out what was happening and to be able to connect with the team. You see teams all the time in any sport, a lot of times marketing their past and, using that as promotion to get new fans in or lapsed fans in. And these books are sort of the same way in getting the fans to, relive the moments that, were so fantastic to them then, and just being able to recall and delve further into them now.
When reading the book, I noticed you mentioned some of the great games in New Jersey Devils history. Would you share with the readers? I noticed some games were mentioned more than others. Would you share with the listeners some of those great games that the broadcasters and journalists talked about the most?
Sure. So first and foremost, it's important to remember in these books, I do not pick the games or the moments that are talked about. I give whoever I'm interviewing the complete free rein to choose what game or moment that they want to talk about because it's their most memorable game or their most memorable moment. It's not me picking in which games or anything. That's why there will be some omissions or some games that are talked about more than you might think. A number of people chose to talk about Marty Brodeur getting his 552nd win to best Patrick Roy's career wins record. There were several people who talked about the Adam Henry double overtime and then overtime winning goals in the 2012 playoffs against Florida and the Rangers, respectively. And there were a couple people who talked about the Yellow Sunday incident that happened in the 88 playoffs against the Bruins, and also the Johnny Mack game that got the Devils into the playoffs for the first time. These are all important moments and games in Devils history, but they're also important and unforgettable to the people talking about them. And that's what the premise of these books is.
Okay, I like to turn the tables. Okay, let's say you were interviewing yourself. What is your favorite Devils game that stands out in your memory?
That's a tough one, being from New York. Yeah, that's definitely a tough one. I would have to say also actually, you know what? I'm going to flip it a little bit. I'm going to go with the Taylor Hall 4-point game, which actually Chris Ryan talked about in this book as well. I was there covering the game for MSG Networks on the Rangers side of things, and I was sitting there, right next to the Devils reporters when Hall went for the 4 points, had the penalty shot goal against Lundqvist, and the crowd was going nuts, chanting MVP every time he touched the puck. And of course, the game was very important to the Devils, who, they needed to win, and then they still needed one more win in order to get into the playoffs. But for them, this was a must-win game. The Rangers, I don't remember if they were exactly mathematically eliminated at this point, but the Rangers were not going to the playoffs. The Devils were fighting tooth and nail to get in, and the atmosphere at Prudential Center was just absolutely incredible. From the moment to the first face-off all the way to the final horn, it was just one of those games that, for a young writer, I was at the end of my first full year, at the end of my first year with MSG Network, the end of my second full year covering a professional hockey team. It was just one of those things that I'll never forget.
Getting into it. You do a lot of, you said you do a lot of sports reading. Of all the hockey authors, do you have any personal faves that kind of, we all have our own personal authors that kind of influence our own style, they kind of inspire us. Are there any authors in particular that really helped you, influence your own personal style of writing? Anyone in particular that you find inspirational?
Well, I'm going to expand that beyond just authors to also writers. But for authors, obviously, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the hockey maven Stan Fischler, who has probably given me more books of his than I've probably even gotten a chance to read in my young life at this point. And obviously, Mark Rosenman, who I mentioned before, he's written about a handful of books now at this point. So they've both been very helpful in that regard. Obviously, growing up, I liked reading in some of the Yankee books and baseball books that were by a number of people. Howie Coffin comes to mind, Joel Sherman. There were a number of people like that. And as for regular writers, and again, being from New York, there's going to be that New York bias a little bit of reading guys like Andrew Gross or Larry Brooks or Rick Carpinello and Dan Rosen and Mike Moriel and Brian Compton. These guys are at the peak of the profession, and, as a young journalist, you want to make sure that you form your own writing style, but you also want to know what works for those who have been there longer than you have.
You talk about growing up, you love baseball. Did you have a favorite baseball player? Mine was Hank Aaron when I was a kid. How about you?
Well, I grew up again during the height of the Yankee dynasty, and I was a core 4 guy. I played shortstop like Jeter. I pitched into a cutter like Mo Rivera, dabbled a little bit in switch hitting as a brief experiment like Posada. Wasn't a lefty, so I can't emulate Pettit there at all. But it was I definitely drew, growing up, inspiration from that era of Yankees.
Okay, well, Matt, that concludes our interview. I want to thank you for appearing on my show, and I hope this is the first of many interviews about your burgeoning literary career in the years to come. I want to thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you for having me, and again, I look forward to however many times you want to have me on, although I hope your listeners don't get tired of hearing from me.
Oh, I don't think they ever will, Matt. I think they're going to be enjoying listening to you in the years to come. And when your third book comes out, we will do this again.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And so, ladies and gentlemen, for next week's show, I will be offering my analyses of the November 20th Democratic presidential debate. Thank you and good night.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.